All right. Well, joining us now for more on the Sean Feucht controversy, very pleased to welcome to the program Christine Van Geyn, litigation director with the Canadian Constitution Foundation, more at theccf.ca. Christine, thank you so much for joining us here.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
I guess at the end of it all, I mean, this singer did perform 3 times in Canada over the weekend, but between the other cancellations, now a church in Montreal facing fines, I guess there's enough still to be concerned about here.
Yeah, my big concern is the revocation of the permits, which seem to be on the basis of the content of the speech, or even not even the content of the music. I don't think that's what's an issue. I think the issue is other statements that he's made, on his website that people just don't like. That's not grounds for revoking a permit to perform in a park. The permits were revoked ostensibly for public safety reasons at a number of these. That's a difficult decision to review, but I have not seen, the rationale for that. It doesn't look like there were actually going to be, for example, violent protests that were going to be out of control that required the permits to be canceled. The bigger concern, though, is what happened in Montreal at the church that stepped in to host him at the last minute. This church invited the singer to perform a worship service inside the church. This artist played worship music. It didn't look like they had any equipment that's outside the norm for what a church service would include. And it looks from the outside like the mayor had asked this concert not to take place. So the police went ahead and issued a ticket saying that the church didn't have a permit to have that concert take place. You don't need a permit to have a church service. It looks like political targeting of this particular performer on the basis of the content of not even his music, but his general political beliefs. And that is not justified in a free and democratic society where we have constitutional protections for freedom of religion and expression.
And it's important to note, I mean, obviously Sean Feucht is American and he's come to this country as a guest. I mean, charter rights still do apply to people who are visiting this country, but I guess at the same time too, we also need to remember there were those who invited him to perform. There were those who want to see him perform. So these are all Canadians we're talking about. I guess we got to think of their charter rights.
Of course. I mean, people want to see him perform, and more people want to see him perform now that there's been this attempt to silence him. I think no one would even be having this conversation most people wouldn't even know who this individual is if there hadn't been these attempts to censor his speech. And it's a classic example of turning someone into a martyr, turning this classic Streisand effect. The more you try to tell someone not to listen to something, the more they're going to pay attention to it.
The question of issuing permits for events, I mean, if we're talking about some kind of public space that's shared or is potentially available to the public, maybe there's a matter for municipalities to have some sort of system. But as you say, this situation in Montreal, it was a church that is designed by its very nature to hold people, to have events, to have people singing or speaking on a stage. On what basis would a municipality claim that they would need a permit for something there?
Yeah, so it's not clear. There is not a lot of public information about the fine that was issued. My understanding is the church has not actually even received the fine. I spoke to them yesterday. What I have come to sort of understand, like what I have pieced together, is it seems like the city will be issuing a fine for the church failing to get a special event permit. Now, this is a permit that takes 10 days to apply for and get approved. And that was not going to be possible in this situation where this individual had his permit from the city revoked. There wasn't good at the last minute. This church stepped in and offered to host him. But putting that aside, the fact is that this is a worship service. From what it looks like to me, this man plays worship music. It's not necessarily a concert. There's no charge to attend. It's available to all inside a church using equipment that seems standard at any church. So I don't think a permit should have to be required for something like that, even if the city wants to claim that this special event permit is required. In these circumstances, first of all, I don't think they should have to require that permit, even if it had been a concert. But second of all, I think that this is just standard use of the church for a religious purpose.
When it comes to political views, it is interesting to note, as you said, that it's not an issue of the songs that this singer performs. It's views that he has expressed in other venues. So it's not even clear or obvious that in this concert or any other concert he's going to repeat those views. Now we can talk about whether they cross any kind of line in and of themselves, but for any sort of controversial speaker or singer or event, how do we judge, I guess, the merits of these things, or whether there's any basis for governments to intervene?
So speech is protected in Canada. The only time you can really impose a content-based restriction is when the high standards in the criminal law on prohibitions to hate speech are triggered. And that is a really, really high standard. To constitute hate speech, you would need to have speech that is the most, these are in the words of the Supreme Court, the most extreme manifestation of the emotion described by the words detestation and vilification that risks causing discriminatory or other harmful effects, or where it forces certain people to argue for their basic humanity. Now, I don't think anything that this performer said on his website rises to that standard. I admit I haven't seen everything he said, but what has been, I'm pretty sure if he had said something that met that standard, CBC would have reported it. I've not seen anything that rose to that standard. And it's just sort of a classic issue, isn't it, that we have a foreign performer who wants to come to Canada with controversial music. This kind of fight has existed my entire life. I'm sure it's existed your whole life. People wouldn't want, Ozzy Osbourne performing. People wouldn't want Eminem performing. Their lyrics are too controversial. Now it's just a different type of speech that's trying to be censored. And in classic fashion, artists benefit from this type of behavior.
Well,
so if you wanted to shine a spotlight and have everyone know who Sean Feucht is, congratulations to all of the people who tried to silence him. Now we're talking about him.
Yeah, he's definitely benefiting from this notoriety for sure. There was the question, I guess, of admissibility into Canada, which is sort of a separate issue. It's a little more arbitrary. I know there's this Irish group, Kneecap, that some want to see, denied entry into Canada for various reasons, right? And I think one of their members is facing a criminal charge in the UK. So those matters become a little different, the arbitrariness of whether someone's admissible for entry into Canada. But I guess the point is, once someone is allowed into the country, then it's simply a matter of, okay, well, we expect you to follow the laws. And if you do, then we shouldn't have an issue.
It doesn't seem like that's an issue in this particular case with Sean Feucht. It doesn't seem like has been any issue on his ability to enter the country. It was only the issuing of these permits. And look, I would be a hypocrite if I said we shouldn't allow Kneecap to perform here either. Even though I think that the statements that Kneecap, this Irish-based hip hop group that has, said horrific things like "kill your MP" and I think "death to the IDF" and waved a Hezbollah flag. I mean, I find all of that abhorrent and disgusting. But I don't think that we should prohibit them from performing. We should counter speech that we don't like with better speech. We should not amplify their message by trying to turn them into martyrs by censoring them. If you don't like a particular performance, you have the right to freedom of expression and assembly. You can go and protest.
Now, as it pertains to Sean Feucht, he did these 3 shows in Canada over the weekend. I think he's back in the United States now, but will be returning to Canada later this summer for 3 more shows. What should we be watching for? And do you expect that any of this is going to end up in court?
So interestingly, I think that the Montreal issue will end up in court. I think the issue of this fine will end up in court unless the city decides not to issue it or to withdraw it. That will end up in court. I don't know if Mr. Feucht is planning on challenging the revocation of the permits. That is harder to challenge because it's what we call an administrative decision. It's reviewed on a standard of reasonableness, and that's a really deferential standard. So if the decision maker at, for example, Parks Canada says we had legitimate concerns about safety at this event, that's a difficult hurdle to overcome. They would have to demonstrate that they had those concerns, but if they have any evidence to support it, the courts are quite deferential to that. The most likely at succeeding is to challenge to the fine if that ever does actually get issued. What to watch for in the fall? I actually think that this issue might go away just because I live about 10 minutes from where Mr. Feucht performed last night. So I drove past last night to see, what was going on. There were no protests. It was a very run-of-the-mill event. It was a lot more people than I think he would otherwise have attracted, but just regular folks just lining up quietly, peacefully to get inside a church to watch a concert. I think if this had not been turned into the big brouhaha that it has been, there wouldn't, if there hadn't been the attempt to cancel him, there wouldn't be all of this attention. So I don't think there's going to be a big issue in the fall unless the people who hate this man continue to make it an issue.
But you mentioned Parks Canada, interesting, because I think if these shows had gone ahead, it's not as though Parks Canada is endorsing this performer. Like if a venue is open for the public to rent or to use, like does there need to be a high bar for, whether Parks Canada is going to step in and say, no, you can't use this?
No, I think that it shouldn't be a content-based bar. It shouldn't depend on the content of the performance. It shouldn't be up to Parks Canada to say, I like this performer, so I'm going to allow it, and I don't like that performer's music, or his particular views, so I won't allow it. Safety is often also used as a pretext for disallowing something that the government just dislikes. So I'm skeptical of government claims about that this was really a safety issue, especially in light of the fact that many other municipalities, the politicians in those municipalities said that this was about the content, Montreal in particular.
We'll see where it all goes from here. Much more, as mentioned, the CCF.ca. Christine, appreciate your insight on all this. Thanks so much for joining us here.
Thanks for having me.